Not only was the Game Boy Advance library known for its legion of iconic original games, but it was also famous for being home to countless classic 80s and 90s ports. With everything ranging from Super Mario to Final Fantasy to Donkey Kong, it truly felt like you were carrying a home console or arcade around in your pocket. But not every popular franchise received the Game Boy Advance port, and that includes Secret of Mana. Instead, what Square Enix opted for was a remake of the original Mana game for the Game Boy called Final Fantasy Adventure, which at the time felt like a good idea. It had been over a decade since the release of that game, and the Mana series had developed quite a decent fan base, so why not revisit the roots of the series and give it a fresh coat of paint while exposing it to a new audience as well. The story of Sword of Mana is set in a world known as Grand's Realm, and revolves around the presence of the Mana Tree, once having existed as a goddess who sacrificed herself. Think of her as a Mother Nature type figure whose job was to invigorate the world with mana energy. After a war in which two sides wrestled for control over harnessing that power, the world carried on in peace until a new threat known as the Dark Lord emerges. In Sword of Mana, you pick between a hero or heroine whose goal it is to confront the Dark Lord and end his quest for the dissolution of mana entirely. Sword of Mana is an action RPG style Game Boy Advance game, not unlike The Legend of Zelda: The Minish Cap, but with a lot more focus on RPG elements such as character building and its weapon system. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. As you level up, your character can begin changing classes depending on where you invest your stat increases. There are 6 main classes which themselves will evolve into advanced classes the more powerful you become. Furthermore, you can unlock up to 8 weapons throughout your playthrough. Each weapon itself will level up and become stronger the more you use it. Weapons are categorized into 3 types based on their attack categories. Slash for sword, sickle, and axe, bash for knuckles, mace, and staff, and jab for bow, spear, and flail. It's wise to level up at least one of each throughout your journey because most enemies have a weakness to one or an immunity to others. So as you can see, there is a lot of depth from an offensive perspective, and I have yet to even get into the spirits. There are 8 spirits in the game, which are basically these magical deities that you will encounter after certain in-game events that will join you. By holding and releasing the R button, you'll fire off an ethereal projectile that changes based on the equipped weapon. With just the press of the R button, you can trigger each spirit's support spell, which can be something like a stat buff or a form of protection. This really allows for strategizing how you approach enemies or even bosses. I really enjoyed some of the combos between spirits and weapons. For example, with the bow equipped, the spirit's attack spell reminds me of something like Johnny Cage's Energy Ball in Mortal Kombat, or with the knuckles equipped, it looks just like a Ryu Hadouken in Street Fighter. Another thing I want to call out are these subtle combo strings that are available depending on your weapons. Using the aforementioned knuckles, you can pull off what looks like a fighting game type of punch combo. And then with the sword, you can launch into a fierce triple slash that's sometimes enough to defeat an enemy in one sequence. To pull these off, all you have to do is finesse a correctly timed triple tap of the A button. Similar to Secret of Mana, you can build up your attack meter, and once it flashes, what's called a death blow can be unleashed, essentially your character's super attack. Like a standard RPG, there are also pieces of armor or accessories that you can acquire and equip to give you certain stat boosts or enhance specific spirits, even give you elemental immunities. There are chests scattered throughout Grand's Realm that will contain these items, as well as the potential to drop after defeating enemies. Speaking of Grand's Realm, I have to give a shout out to the Sword of Mana world design. This game is absolutely one of the best looking Game Boy Advance games. The art style fits right in with the usual Mana aesthetic, the settings are bright and colorful, and there is even a time of day system. When transitioning from screen to screen, the scene will change from morning to afternoon to evening to night. This really adds a cool touch to the mood. As you traverse from town to town and during different terrains and conditions, you will encounter plenty of NPCs who occasionally will offer you fetch quests to help you earn lucre, which is the game's currency or sometimes an item. While I believe games like these wouldn't feel right without side quests, unfortunately Sword of Mana doesn't offer much by way of tracking these. And often I found they were not worth the trouble, but I still appreciated the character interactions. An important element that presents itself a little ways in is the hothouse. A small pot will appear in the middle of the screen. By engaging with it, you can actually enter, and this is where some of the game's upgrading and farming features come into play. After meeting Watts, he'll take residence within, and you can talk to him to either upgrade your weapons or temper them with certain effects. This is one part of the game that I didn't fully appreciate the first time around. By going up the stairs, you can speak to Trent who runs the orchard. Offering Trent some items in your inventory can yield upgrade materials. And this is the point where I want to recommend the Nintendo Power official Sword of Mana guide. Where the game fails to explain a lot of its mechanics, the official guide more than makes up for it. Not only is it a thorough walkthrough, but it includes charts for weapon and armor upgrading and a whole lot more. I'm including the link to this from Internet Archive down below. One area I wish had a lot more to offer was multiplayer. I always harp on this when it comes to these games, but considering Secret of Mana was a 3-player couch co-op game, it's hard to overlook the lack thereof here. Instead, the game sticks you with a character you did not select as your NPC partner. And while you have the option to dictate their behavior, it just misses the mark. And anyone who's played Sword of Mana will tell you the same. It's a shame they couldn't include a 2-player mode via link cable. And what's even more strange is how they did utilize the link cable, but only for the Amigo feature that requires you to connect with other Sword of Mana owners, all just to unlock the ability to use screen-wide attack summons. Regardless of this missed opportunity, you won't need a sidekick to enjoy Sword of Mana. Finding a loose cartridge today isn't too difficult and currently only goes for around $25 or so I recommend hunting this one down. What's really bizarre to me is the exclusion of it in the Collection of Mana bundle of games. Instead, they opted only to include Final Fantasy Adventure. Since it was never re-released after 2003, it would have made sense to include it in the collection, but it is mysteriously absent. I'll maintain hope that one day we may see it added to the Nintendo Switch Online service. One last thing worth noting is that there is a ROM hack of Sword of Mana that adds improvement to the game's ring menu system. This was something that garnered a lot of criticism for adding frustration when it comes to inventory management. But with this, battling is now easier than ever. So I want to know, have you played Sword of Mana before, and what are your thoughts on the game? And has anyone ever had much luck with the Amigo system? If so, I'd love to hear more on that. Thanks for watching.